All right. We've gathered here today to talk about converting different issue types to other issue types. And Alex just gave me a great overview of the ultimate vision of the plan team is to enable customers to be able to put together their own issues and to create their own types full of the features and widgets that are important to them in their workflow. So we are not to that point yet. We're still at the beginning. The Monitor team has used incidents as kind of one of the guinea pigs as the first issue type that we've created that is different than an issue in GitLab. And the topic that we're talking about today in context to the full vision is the ability to convert one issue type to another. So the specific problem that we've run into is when we released incidents a few months ago, people started to use them and they contain different features and functionality than a regular issue. They look different. They do different things. And one of the problems people are running into is when they create an issue, sometimes they meant for it to be an incident. Or customers are having their users create a bunch of incidents and they're finding out that they instead actually wanted those to be issues. And right now, there's no way to convert between types, keeping the same record. There's a bunch of different solutions that we could apply here, but the topic I wanted to talk about today was the true conversion, architecture concerns, data concerns. Gabe gave some context on the issue that the architecture that he was imagining was the underlying data layer for all issues regardless of type would have a field or have all of the features from every issue type possible. And then the display in the UI would simply be showing a feature if it's supposed to be on an incident or not. But on the back end, every single record has every single feature. And I think that there were my team, Sarah, Peter, and I had some concerns about, how that works with dynamic features, and is that really a scalable and sustainable model if we're going to create a ton of types in the future? So I wanted to open it up for discussion. Sarah, did I capture? I don't think I did a very good job of capturing this. Do you mind adding color?
Yeah, I can express what my concerns are. So I think there are kind of like two ways you can look at converting an issue between types. And one is data and one is functionality. Because all issue types are issues and all the data is associated with every issue in the database. Transferring between issues, like from that perspective, is very straightforward. Where I think it gets trickier is things that happen in different scenarios and circumstances that aren't captured when you just switch. So, for example, with incidents, there's an incident SLA countdown that gets triggered when an issue starts. Or when an incident starts. But if you just have a standard issue that you've switched over to an incident, when does that happen? And I think those types of problems of like, here's functionality that happens at a certain time in a certain place, would no longer be fair assumptions for a particular issue type if we just switched without having like custom migration paths between every individual issue type. And that just has maintenance costs.
I think, is our service level agreement countdown timer an example of this?
Yes.
So for the plan team, we have a feature that you configure in the operations settings that you pick a service level agreement time, 4 hours as an example. So when an incident opens, there's a timer on it and it shows you how much time you have until the end of your SLA. And we built this specifically for our internal support team that wants to be able to track like how long things have been open and which things we're getting close to the SLA on. So it's a dynamic timer that updates as it decreases. And if we were to take an incident with a timer on it and convert it, what happens to that data? What if it was converted back? Is it still there? Does it retain? Are we really going to maintain timers for every single issue open? So that's one of our concerns.
Yeah, so I guess it's something like we kind of need some hooks for issue types, right? Like on create or on remove, which we kind of already have right now. Like when an incident is created, we do these hooks, right? We have some sort of code that starts a timer or whatever. And we'd have to find a way to kind of trigger the same hooks when an issue type is changed. I guess that's a bit, trickier, and the details, we could discuss later. But then the idea is like, it's the same set of hooks, I guess. So I guess I'm saying it's not really that hard, maybe. I'm not sure, but,
Yeah, I just want to add to that. And I think we should be sort of explicit in mapping this sort of functionality where when you change the type, what happens when you change from one type to another, because then either way we'll end up with these sort of edge cases. Like to me, making a duplicate and then closing the other type or whatever state, put it in whatever state it is as not functional, does not truly solve it, because then what if you add yet another functionality to the, for instance, take the same incident, right? And you want to notify whoever is the DRI for the incident when the incident is closed. Now you still need to go back and make sure that that functionality is not triggered when you close the incident just because you changed the type and so on. So to me, I think we should be very explicit about mappings doing this, what kind of functionality maps to what kind of type. Like I don't have a complete solution right now, but just I think just this is going to be something that we want to maintain either way. We just need to make sure we make it easy to maintain and we make it as explicit as possible so that we can handle that stuff.
Kind of building on that sentiment and what we started with in the conversation of the future direction of plan, that makes me think that rather than really thinking about switching types, we should be thinking about transferability of like widgets, basically, of like what happens when a widget itself is turned on or off for a particular issue rather than what type it is, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Well, just to clarify here, I think we'll define widgets per type still and not per issue instance, right? So when you transfer a type to another type, you don't necessarily transfer all the widgets. Possibly, like as a solution, as an alternative, maybe we can transfer those widgets as part of a note or something like that to just keep track of some information that used to be on the original type, I guess. I don't know how, I don't know the entire thinking behind that, so maybe that's not okay.
Sorry, Emily, I can weigh in on that a little bit. Like there's going to be like a widget, and then there will be an instance of a widget that's associated to a specific issue or incident, is how I was thinking about it. So back to Sarah's point, it sort of is like transferring that, like, is it transferable? And since like a good use case would be incidents have severity, which is a widget. I see value in having a bug that has severity on it as well, right? A type of issue, this bug that has severity. Those are all like, they should use the same sort of like underlying data that is the severity widget. The severity widget should store sort of its own data, or maybe it stores a little bit of its own data that's part of the instance of it associated to an incident or an issue. But the basic idea is like if I were to transfer or convert an incident to an issue and they both don't have the same widget configured, then it is sort of just like turning off the widget instead of like, and that's where it's an engineering concern. You can decide if you want to delete that information when you convert it, or if you want to store it for like, if you were to convert it back. I'm sort of like of the mindset where if you do convert an incident to an issue, for example, you would remove basically any widgets that aren't on the issue. So that way you don't have a bunch of stale data sitting around. But I totally defer that to engineering to decide.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Delete whatever is not related. And then if you convert back, then you just need to fill in the data. Or again, if you want some sort of a history, because really like the answer to everything is it depends. Like a scenario is where you opened an incident wrongly, then you don't need the old data, right? You don't need any of the data on the incident because you just didn't want to open an incident in the first place. And then the other case is when you convert an incident to an issue, just because that's not really an incident, it's something that can be solved, but it's not an incident. So you still want some of the data to be present on the issue, or at least to have some link back to the incident. So you have some original stuff to go back and look at it. So yeah, there are two scenarios that are both, I think, valid. And we need to think how to solve it. Again, another, like as an option is to perhaps have a system comment or some sort of a tracking of the information of the past information.
So Alex, just to clarify part of what you just said, or to summarize the last three people who have talked. So we have widgets that are associated to a type. If I was going to convert an incident to an issue as an example, our service level agreement countdown timer is a widget that is not associated with the issue type. So if someone executed that conversion, we would turn off that widget. We would delete whatever the timer was at. In the scenario that someone converted back, we are not saving the state of that countdown timer. Someone would need to go and redo it. Is that aligned with what everybody's talking about?
Yeah,
that's my understanding.
Perfect. My second summary is we're going to have a set of features or widgets that go across all types. Just thinking out loud, maybe it's the description, the assignee, the discussion, all comments and threads therein. And those will obviously transfer to the new one. So we'd probably retain a discussion across everything regardless of type. We will retain the description across everything regardless of type. Is that accurate?
We'll retain anything where another type has that same widget.
Okay, so everything will be a widget, even the basic components that I described, the discussion, the description.
I believe so. So the way that I'm kind of looking at it, and I've been looking at this product a lot lately, is Fibery. But like everything sort of, there's some stuff that isn't editable, like creation date, modification date, created by, but pretty much everything else is flexible. So you have an ID. And then what they do is like they make comments or would be our discussions. They're sort of like an extension that you can turn on or turn off on you can like basically uninstall it from your issue type. References is another one. Formulas are kind of like custom fields. And the way that they sort of handle I guess like the deletion of things, basically if you were to delete this, base just says like it's irreversible. All the data will be deleted. Views that allow this type will require reconfiguration. Like, and this is for. I think
this maps exactly to what we are about to do. I've looked at it over the weekend as well, and you can define different types, and you can define all sorts of attributes between them and relationships, but it does not allow you to convert one type to another. There is just no way to do that. Like if you define a bug as an entity and an epic as an entity, you cannot go from one to another there is just no way. So if you just need to either delete it, copy over the information, or do whatever you want to do. So in that regard, that's not what they don't have this problem, so to say.
Yeah, I just I don't think we need to retain anything that in that same case of like what they showed, like you basically delete the data when you convert it to a type that doesn't have the same widget. And that way, like it will keep cruft to a minimum, and like things like timers and whatnot. Like the timer would just start whenever it gets converted to an incident is what I would think. Because that's when you acknowledge like, hey, this is an incident. We're going to convert it. If you were to convert it from an incident back to an issue, then the timer would disappear because issues don't have SLOs, you know?
Yeah. So
I have another example.
yeah. Yeah.
So some of our incidents are attached to alert, that meaning that we create incidents from the alert, and our alert table contains the link to this incident ID. If you're going to change this incident to an issue, we'll probably remove this link between alert and incident. But if we decide to switch this issue back to the incident, we won't be able to set up this link back to the alert. In this case, maybe we can restrict switching incidents to issues which was created from the alerts, if it makes sense.
Can we have like related objects, sort of like we have related issues or related, and we have related alerts there? Can we link them this way?
We have
so when you to be specific, like you've changed the incident to an issue, you've lost the alert, and then you decided, well, this issue after all is an incident, let's move it back to the incident, right? So you don't have the alerts anymore. Can you go and just pick them up? I mean, would that be a satisfactory UX, UI to link them back to those alerts?
Stepping back for a second here, Sarah, I'm going to drop this link in there. That's what this whole issue is about, which we want to do. Like the related items should just become like a widget, and we want to redo, and it's going to be a little bit more complex, but there's no reason why an alert can't also be associated to an issue. There's no reason why an incident can't be associated to an issue. Like it's a standalone thing that maintains its own data. And if an issue has the related items, basically widget on, then we wouldn't need to delete the relationship between the alerts, right? You could maybe manually do that after you convert it if you really didn't want it anymore. But I don't know why we need to, like, if you treat each of these things sort of like as independent widgets that sort of store their own data, it makes a lot more sense to me when you transfer them, because incidents should have the same sort of relatability in many respects that issues do. And I don't know why we need to restrict it to what types you can relate to what necessarily.
Probably we can keep the alerts, but tweak the functionality of the alerts if the related type is the issue. So the alerts would not influence the issue the same way they would influence the incident, if that makes sense.
I think I agree that perhaps in the long term, we don't need to restrict permissions or functionality around the conversion of things. But I think before we put those safeguards in place, we might restrict the ability for someone to convert an incident that's been automatically created by an IT alert that's coming through an integration, so that we can make it a better experience and a user doesn't convert it to an issue and then it disappears from the incidents list and from everybody's view. I don't mind that as an MVC, because that seems like something we can reverse.
Yeah, I think that's fine. For me, I think what makes things tricky a bit here is that everything isn't implemented as a widget yet, right? Widget meaning it works across all issue types, right? This incident and alert thing is pretty specific to incidents and not generic. If it were generic, then we wouldn't have this problem, right? And yeah, so I think one of the key things we have to like build up in that doc for issue types or something was like to make sure all features moving forward would be widgets, right? So that we don't add up to the tech debt that we need to convert to widgets. And adding to what was said a while ago, I think the problem of moving from one type to another is actually similar to the problem of like switching if we ever have like custom types, like adding or deleting widgets from a custom type. It's actually very similar. The only difference with moving is that moving only affects that one specific issue instead of all the issues of that type, right? So basically when we move one issue type to another, we just keep all the widgets that are common to both and remove those that are not present in the new one. And then basically our hooks would live on the widgets. Like for example, we have this SLA counters. The hooks for starting or stopping the counter would probably be on the SLA widget, right? It's not like tied to an incident issue type or something. So when an SLA widget is added counter starts. When an SLA widget is removed, counter stops. So it works for moving issue types. It could work for creating custom types with an SLA, and later on they decided, then it's the same hook that gets called, which stops all counters. And if you move an issue type, it just stops for that one specific issue. But yeah, I think it solves both problems, like for the future problem of custom issue types, and then the moving one is pretty similar, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to follow up on and say, like, about SLAs and SLOs and managing that stuff, is that encapsulating that and treating that like as a widget, because there's other types of issues that would benefit from that, whether like defect. If you think about GitLab itself, we have SLOs for defects, right? And we have SLAs, I'm sure, for defects as well, or response time to customers. And it's not always just about incidents. It could be like, what if we get to the point with service desk where we want to put SLAs on service desk issues or something like that? And so making it like it's basically encapsulating the behavior of what managing SLA would be independent of type, like ensures that as you do, like Henrik said, convert from one thing to next, it's a lot easier to reason about, and you're not like deleting something that's specific to a specific type necessarily. It's more like a generic behavior of the system.
So I appreciate that vision, and I think that it'll make GitLab very extensible and help us become a visionary workflow tool. But if we have this SLA countdown timer widget and it starts being used on a bunch of other types, I am now on the hook for making sure it works for all personas that are considered that useful, or is it owned by the monitor team?
It can be owned by the monitor team, but just like issues are owned by the plan team, anybody can add stuff to them and change things and work with me to extend functionality, right? I think that's sort of like how I look at it, is like you can't break use cases that exist already. If you want to contribute to widgets, you can work, like we can even just say who is the DRI for each widget, like which PM or something. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But if you think about strictly from the generic behavior of what an SLA is, like it's not unique to just monitor. It's like a
Totally
thing, right?
Yeah.
And so like that's where I think it is important to have DRIs just to make sure that like nothing breaks. But you wouldn't be on the hook for making sure it works for every persona. The team that needs it to work for a specific persona would be on the hook for working with you to extend the widget.
Great.
If that makes sense.
So
Yeah.
for the SLA thing, to make it a pseudo widget, let's say at this point, would mean to bring all of these hooks stuff into the SLA sort of, so that it can be reused within issue, within incident, and within test case. Is that the next step that you're looking for?
Alex, I'm very sorry. I was writing a sentence in the notes doc. Could you repeat your question?
So I'm trying to understand what the challenge for the, I guess for the engineers mainly at this point, in making kind of this type change okay. And the, I've heard of one issue that you guys are having with the SLA stuff. So it sounds to me that the problem to solve right now is to make sure that this SLA functionality works as a standalone widget, so that it can be, it can work both on issues or on every issue type, issue incidents or test cases. We have 3 of them right now. Does that sound, and I think the question for the engineers, does that sound as a problem to solve, and is that something solvable at this point? Is that something that is not doable?
From my perspective, I think the question of can we implement it, and do we know how to implement it once we make a decision on exactly what it is? Yeah, we can do that, no problem. My biggest concern going into this was, are we going to do this in such a way that we back ourselves into a corner of something horrible to grow and maintain as issue types grow?
And that was, Alex, that was also my concern, is that the SLA countdown timer is our one example. We've added some other features to incidents that I don't think pose enormous concerns, but there is a tab where we are automatically populating and rendering charts from Prometheus. And then there's another area where you can upload screenshots for metrics. And I think the takeaway from this discussion is all new things that we add to incidents. We should take a second to think about, how can this be a widget? Is this really specific to our use case, or is this something that would be more useful to multiple stages? And then just start storing everything as a widget. That's my takeaway from this.
Yeah, I think I would also say you don't have to think super hard about, is it useful for all the other stages if you make it as a widget first, right? Because then it can like evolve as other stages need it, but you're still using the same sort of architectural framework that solves the problem of like, if you need to convert something to this other thing, we already know how to handle that. And so that's where like you shouldn't feel bogged down to overly collaborate with other teams if you don't think you need to. But there are certain things, like you said, upload screenshots of reports or metrics, and I'm not sure, I need to go look at what that looks like, but like I've also have on my roadmap, we need to build a better attachments manager for issues, right?
Perfect. So, it's like the same thing.
Yeah, so you'll start to see, like, as you talk to different teams, not every team is going to have the same overlapping needs, but there's usually one or two that need something in a similar wheelhouse. So it's worth like asking around if you want, but if not, you can still just build it that same way. Because if you were to build the widget for uploading screenshots that way, I could then be like, oh, well, this thing exists in the library. Can I go to work with you to extend it to support my use cases or needs, right?
Have we, do we have an example of this widgets library, or is this still an ambiguous thing that's just the ideal future state? Like, have we started this, or is this something that needs to be started?
I'm letting it happen organically, I would say at this point, but what does need to happen is we need to update our documentation from an engineering standpoint of how to build the widgets in a standardized way, if that makes sense, or like what that looks like. I think that would be helpful, because it would basically like work well. And I think that's where, like, right now I want to start it organically based on need. If you build all the widgets this way, then we could build like the library on top of things that were already there, instead of like over engineering a ton of stuff right now. But that was
totally. I think I'm trying to get at, have we created a widget yet?
I don't think we have a working example.
Okay, there we go.
It's a widget as a standalone that works across all of the issue types, just to be very fair and direct.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Working on,
extremely
I was
helpful.
involved in reviewing the incident thing, right? Was it the SLA thing? I forgot.
Yep.
But yeah, I believe we already like designed the database to be like ready for issue types, right? And I'm not sure about the current state. Is there, like, is the code on top of the SLA thing still very specific to incidents, or were they built as widgets, or how widget is it right now? Or like, you know,
I will let, Vitaly.
It was a severity widget, which we've did with this idea in mind.
So we do have one. That's great.
Yeah, well, it's
okay.
Severity.
Okay, so that's different, just so everybody is very clear. The severity widget is different than the countdown timer widget, but these are two features that we built for incidents that should be widgets, so that we can start this pattern of creating features as widgets and putting them in the library and documenting them. One, so that we can figure out how to convert issue types, other issue types, and two, so that we can start along the vision of people have access to widgets that they can reuse on issue types for their use cases and other stages, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would say we're about year out from the user stuff, or six to 8 months. So, but that's where like I wanted to start building it internally behind the scenes so that we can like organically get there. But that would be very much correct. The other thing that's worth surfacing too, specific to you, because I was thinking about it, is there will probably need to be a way for the hooks to work with other widgets directly too. Because like if you think about the case of SLAs or SLOs and severity, like GitLab, for example, depending on the severity, you have a different SLO target. So it's almost like we don't need to over-engineer it, but I'm sure for y'all at some point, you're gonna be like, hey, if it's an S1, it needs to be, 24 hours. If it's an S2, it needs to be, a week or something like that. So there'll be a relationship between those two, I think, eventually, if I were to guess.
We are 6 minutes over, so I just wanted to summarize for the monitor team and figure out if we need another discussion or if we can keep going async. So severity was implemented as a widget. Was the countdown timer implemented as a widget? I know it's an ambiguous question, but. So figure out if SLA timer was implemented as a widget. We can do that. And then my question maybe for Sarah is, do we need to convert everything to a widget before we enable the conversion between issue types, or anyone? Do we need to set that up before we allow users to change the type on something?
I don't think so. Not necessarily if you just remove that information.
Yeah, we can just have a modal that pops up that says, we're going to delete all of this information. This information will be transferred. Okay.
One question about deleting or retaining information when converting, for example, incidents to issues. Have we decided to actually delete the information or just change the type and deal with it actually? And for example, SLA, currently we do not check when applying the labels on exceeded incidents, while on incidents which expired the SLA. We do not check whether the issue or the incident is actually an incident or not, or eligible to have an SLA exceeded label on it or not. So this code does not check the issue type right now. So my question is, if we would to remove the data when converting an issue or incident to an issue, it's more complex on the backend side because you need to add more code to or add or new the hooks Heinrich mentioned. So it would be much easier to just change the issue type from incident to issue and deal with maybe some edge cases where we do not check whether the specific widget or functionality is available for this kind of issue or type of issue. So from engineer perspective, it's easier to change the type and not and retain the data actually. But this is just my take on it.
I think we would need a system to determine what functionality is available for what issue types without checking a type like directly, though, in order to move forward in that direction.
Yes, we have this kind of. So Heinrich introduced the, I think it is like a pattern where we check on the issue whether a specific functionality is available using blah blah available. I did forget the exact pattern, but we, instead of checking the issue type, actually we are checking if, for example, SLA is supported or not. Yeah, I think it's something along the line supported, right, Heinrich?
Okay,
I forgot.
very cool.
Yeah, I think the idea is like for things like that, like applying the label, you shouldn't be checking the type, but we should be checking for the presence of this like widget or feature, right? So that it could be like more generic. But yeah, these are things that to note when we build out these kinds of features.
Yeah, so in the case for SLA, we would need to add this check before applying a label to an issue instance, whether SLA is available on this issue. Not checking the type, but checking the availability of this feature, and we would be good. So maybe we could start by just changing the type and verify how much we would break when changing a type. I suspect not much, but it's still easier to just like change an issue type than just starting to implement hooks and whatsoever and start to delete actual data, which you cannot recover after obviously you've deleted it.
So it sounds like we have a path forward. It sounds like we can fairly simply enable the conversion of a type from an incident to issue or issue to incident. And we'll retain the data, which actually might be nice in the interim before we figure out a better pattern for converting between types. But this will create not tech debt, but certainly some follow-up work for making sure that we're architecting this in a repeatable way. Is that a decent summary? Okay. We are way over. I think that this was a really helpful meeting, so thank you to everybody who was here. I'm going to do my best to summarize the outcome. I'm going to put it on the issue that I have linked in the description, and then I'll tag everyone so that you can check my accuracy. So thank you. Have a great day.